The airport buzzed with activity as travelers hurried to their gates. Among them stood Marcus, a middle-aged man dressed in simple but neat clothes. He carried a leather briefcase and had a calm demeanor as he waited in the first-class boarding line. The line moved quickly, and passengers ahead of him smiled as they handed their tickets to the gate attendant, a sharp-dressed woman named Lydia. Lydia greeted each traveler warmly, her polished smile never wavering, until Marcus approached. Her eyes swept over him, pausing on his plain outfit and scuffed shoes. Her smile faded, replaced by a raised eyebrow. Marcus didn't notice at first, offering her his ticket with a polite nod. "Excuse me, sir," Lydia said, her tone sharp and curt. "This line is for first-class passengers only." Marcus blinked, slightly taken aback. "Yes, I know," he replied calmly, pointing to his ticket. "I'm in first class." Lydia gave a tight-lipped smile, her gaze darting from his ticket to his face. "Are you sure you're in the right line?" she asked, her voice dripping with doubt. "First class is reserved for premium passengers." Marcus frowned slightly but remained polite. "Yes, I'm sure," he said. "My ticket says first class." The passengers behind him began to murmur, some looking impatient, others curious about the holdup. Lydia sighed loudly, as if Marcus's presence was a personal inconvenience. She glanced at the ticket in his hand, but made no move to take it. "Let me see your ticket," she said, her tone making it clear she expected something to be wrong. Marcus handed over the ticket, his calm demeanor unchanged. Lydia inspected it, her eyes narrowing. "Sir, are you aware that this is a first-class seat? These tickets aren't cheap, you know." "Yes, I'm aware," Marcus replied evenly, though the questioning was beginning to wear on him. "I booked it myself." Lydia looked at him again, her expression unreadable but clearly skeptical. Instead of scanning the ticket, she stepped aside and gestured for him to move out of the line. "I need to verify this," she said. "Please wait over there." Marcus hesitated but complied, stepping aside to let other passengers pass. He felt the weight of curious stares and heard the faint whispers around him. Some passengers shook their heads in sympathy, while others seemed amused. Standing off to the side, Marcus remained composed. He had faced worse situations in his life and knew better than to lose his temper. Lydia, meanwhile, returned to her station, scanning tickets with her smile back in place, as if nothing had happened. As the line dwindled, Marcus stood quietly, his mind reflecting on the situation. He wondered why Lydia had treated him differently than the other passengers. Was it his appearance? His clothes? He didn't have time to dwell on it, as Lydia finished boarding the last passenger in line and finally turned her attention back to him. Her expression was firm, and her tone carried a hint of impatience. "I'll need more proof that you're eligible for first class," she said, crossing her arms. Marcus took a deep breath, preparing himself to respond with the calm dignity he always carried. Little did Lydia know, her assumptions were about to be proven very, very wrong. Marcus stood by the side of the boarding area, quietly observing the situation. Lydia, the gate attendant, was now focused on her computer, her fingers tapping rapidly on the keyboard. From her body language, it was clear she still didn't believe he belonged in first class. Passengers nearby continued to glance in his direction, their curiosity growing. A man standing nearby leaned toward another passenger and whispered, "I think she thinks he's trying to sneak into first class." The other person chuckled softly. "Doesn't look like the type, though," they replied. Marcus caught bits and pieces of their conversation, but chose to ignore it. He had dealt with judgment before and wasn't about to let this situation rattle him. Instead, he watched Lydia, waiting patiently for her to finish whatever she was doing. After what felt like an eternity, Lydia looked up from her screen and motioned for Marcus to step forward. He approached, maintaining his calm demeanor. "Yes?" he asked politely. "Do you have any identification?" Lydia asked, her voice flat. "Something that proves this ticket is really yours." Marcus raised an eyebrow, surprised by the demand. "I already gave you my ticket," he said. "Isn't that enough?" Lydia shook her head, her expression firm. "We have procedures to follow," she replied. "I need to make sure everything checks out." Marcus reached into his briefcase and retrieved his ID, handing it over without protest. As she examined it, he couldn't help but notice the smirk playing on her lips, as if she expected to find something wrong. The whispers among the other passengers grew louder. "This is ridiculous," one man muttered. "He's just standing there like a criminal." Lydia, seemingly unaware of the growing tension, finished checking Marcus's ID and returned it to him. "I'll still need to confirm this with my supervisor," she said. "Please continue waiting." Marcus nodded, though he felt the sting of embarrassment. He stepped back again, enduring the judgmental looks from some passengers and the concerned glances from others. A young boy tugged on his mother's sleeve and asked loudly, "Why won't they let him on the plane?" "Hush, sweetie," the mother whispered, pulling the child closer. Lydia picked up the phone at her station and began a hushed conversation, occasionally glancing at Marcus. Though he couldn't hear her words, her tone suggested she was convinced something wasn't right. Marcus sighed quietly, his patience wearing thin, but his determination to remain composed stronger than ever. After a few minutes, Lydia hung up the phone and turned back to Marcus. "I'm waiting for my supervisor," she announced, loud enough for everyone around to hear. "Until then, I suggest you stay right there." The humiliation of being singled out and treated with suspicion was undeniable, but Marcus refused to let it show. Instead, he stood tall, his calm exterior hiding the frustration brewing inside. He glanced at his watch, noting the time. If this went on much longer, he might miss the flight entirely. As more passengers gathered at nearby gates, the scene was becoming harder to ignore. All eyes were on Marcus and Lydia. And though Marcus didn't say a word, he knew this situation wasn't over, not by a long shot. Something had to give. And soon, Marcus continued to stand calmly, watching Lydia as she tried to appear busy at her desk. The murmurs among the other passengers grew louder, some clearly annoyed by the delay. One man in the crowd called out, "Why are you holding him up? He showed you his ticket already." Others nodded in agreement, but Lydia ignored them, focusing on her computer screen. At that moment, a woman in a smart airline uniform approached. Her name tag read Rachel, Senior Gate Manager. She had a confident stride and a no-nonsense expression. Seeing the commotion, she glanced at Lydia, then at Marcus, and immediately sensed that something was wrong. Rachel walked straight up to Lydia. "What's going on here?" she asked in a firm but professional tone. Lydia straightened up, clearly flustered. "This man," she began, motioning toward Marcus, "claims he's a first-class passenger. But, well, I needed to verify his ticket. It's just protocol." Rachel raised an eyebrow and turned to Marcus. "May I see your ticket, sir?" she asked politely. Marcus handed it over without hesitation. Rachel scanned it carefully, her practiced eyes immediately recognizing the markings of a valid first-class ticket. She looked up at Marcus and gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. "This is perfectly fine," she said. "I'm sorry for the delay." Lydia, standing behind Rachel, quickly interjected, "I was just making sure everything was in order. You never know these days who might try to." Rachel cut her off with a sharp look. "That's enough," she said firmly. "It's our job to ensure all passengers are treated with respect. This ticket clearly belongs to him, and there was no reason to question it further." Lydia flushed, her cheeks turning red. "I was just trying to follow the rules," she mumbled. Rachel ignored her and turned back to Marcus. "On behalf of the airline, I sincerely apologize for the inconvenience. You should never have been treated this way." Marcus gave her a polite smile. "Thank you," he said. "I appreciate your help." But the situation wasn't over yet. A few nearby passengers had started recording the interaction on their phones, and the buzz of the crowd grew louder. One man shouted, "She owes him more than an apology." while another muttered, "About time someone stepped in." Rachel's professionalism didn't waver. She gestured for Marcus to follow her. "Please, let me personally escort you to your seat," she said. Marcus nodded and began to follow her, but before they could leave, Lydia spoke up again. "I wasn't trying to be rude," she said defensively, her voice tinged with desperation. "I just thought." Rachel stopped and turned to face her. "What you thought was based on assumptions," she said calmly but firmly. "And those assumptions caused unnecessary trouble for this passenger. Let this be a lesson. Never judge someone by their appearance." Lydia fell silent, her gaze dropping to the floor. The other passengers watched the exchange, some shaking their heads at Lydia's behavior, others applauding Rachel's firm stance. As Marcus followed Rachel toward the boarding gate, he couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. While the experience had been humiliating, it also showed him that fairness and professionalism could still prevail. And though Lydia's actions had been unjust, Marcus had no intention of letting the incident ruin his day. Little did anyone know, the story was far from over. Marcus was about to share something that would leave everyone stunned. As Rachel led Marcus through the boarding gate, a hush fell over the area. Passengers watched curiously, some still holding their phones as if anticipating something dramatic to happen. Marcus walked with quiet confidence, his calm demeanor a sharp contrast to the tense atmosphere just moments before. Once inside the jet bridge, Rachel turned to him. "Mr. Marcus, I can't apologize enough for what just happened," she said sincerely. "This isn't how we treat our passengers, especially someone with your standing." Marcus nodded graciously. "Thank you, Rachel," he replied. "I appreciate your professionalism. That's all I was expecting in the first place." Rachel's eyes softened with relief. "I'll make sure this situation is addressed. Lydia's behavior was unacceptable." Marcus smiled slightly but didn't respond, letting her words hang in the air. As they entered the first-class cabin, Marcus was immediately greeted with warm smiles from the flight attendants. One of them stepped forward and said, "Mr. Marcus, welcome aboard. It's a pleasure to have you with us again." Rachel's face reflected a moment of recognition as the flight attendant's words sunk in. "Again," she murmured, glancing at Marcus. Marcus chuckled lightly. "I've flown with your airline many times," he explained. "I actually hold your VIP membership for frequent travelers." Rachel blinked, startled. "Wait, you're the Marcus Hayes, the executive from Haylock Industries." Several passengers in first class, overhearing the name, turned their heads. Marcus simply nodded, his expression humble. "Yes, that's me," he said, almost as if it wasn't a big deal. Rachel's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Haylock Industries was a well-known multinational company, and Marcus Hayes was not only its CEO, but also one of the airline's most valued clients. His business had contributed significantly to their corporate travel accounts. "I had no idea," Rachel stammered. "If I'd known." Marcus raised a hand, cutting her off gently. "It doesn't matter who I am," he said, his tone firm but kind. "What matters is how people are treated, regardless of their status." Rachel nodded, her admiration for Marcus growing. She quickly gestured to a spacious seat in the first-class cabin. "Please, make yourself comfortable. If there's anything you need, don't hesitate to let us know." Marcus thanked her and settled into his seat, pulling out a book from his briefcase. As he prepared to relax, the cabin door opened, and a hurried Lydia entered, accompanied by another airline supervisor. She looked nervous but determined as she approached Marcus. Lydia started, her voice shaky. "I came to apologize. I made a mistake." Marcus looked up at her, his expression calm and unreadable. He closed his book and waited for her to continue. "I shouldn't have judged you," Lydia admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "It was wrong of me to assume things based on appearances. I'm so sorry." The first-class cabin grew silent as passengers listened intently. Marcus studied Lydia for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you for your apology," he said simply. "I hope this experience teaches you something important." Lydia nodded quickly, her relief evident. "It has," she said. "It really has." As she walked away, the passengers exchanged murmurs of approval. Some even clapped quietly, impressed by Marcus's grace under pressure. But as Marcus leaned back in his seat, he knew this incident was just the beginning. The lesson Lydia learned today would ripple far beyond this flight, reminding everyone that respect and dignity are the most valuable tickets anyone can hold. The plane began to taxi down the runway, and the hum of the engines filled the cabin. Marcus leaned back in his seat, flipping through his book, but he couldn't help noticing the occasional glances from nearby passengers. Some whispered to each other, clearly still talking about the earlier scene at the gate. Across the aisle, a man in a sharp suit leaned over. "Excuse me," he said quietly. "I couldn't help but overhear your name. Are you the Marcus Hayes from Haylock Industries?" Marcus looked up with a polite smile. "Yes, that's me," he replied, keeping his tone humble. The man's face lit up with recognition. "I thought so. I've read about your work in sustainable technology. Your company's innovations are incredible. It's an honor to meet you." "Thank you," Marcus said, nodding graciously. "We've worked hard to make a difference." The brief conversation caught the attention of others in the cabin, and soon more passengers were leaning in, introducing themselves, and expressing their admiration. Marcus, though slightly overwhelmed, remained polite and engaging. He answered questions about his work, shared insights about his journey, and even cracked a few light jokes to put everyone at ease. Lydia, standing near the galley, watched the scene unfold with growing discomfort. She had no idea that the man she dismissed so easily was not just a first-class passenger but a respected figure admired by many. Her earlier actions replayed in her mind, each moment more embarrassing than the last. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to speak, his tone calm and thoughtful. At one point, a woman asked him, "How do you stay so humble? You're clearly someone important, but you didn't act entitled even when she—" The woman stopped, glancing at Lydia. Marcus chuckled softly. "It's simple," he said. "I know where I came from. I wasn't always in this position. I worked hard, but I also had help along the way. No one achieves success alone, and no one deserves to be treated poorly, no matter who they are." The cabin grew quiet as his words sank in. Even the flight attendants paused to listen. Lydia's face turned red, and she looked down, fiddling nervously with the corner of her uniform. One of the passengers clapped, and soon others joined in, applauding Marcus's wisdom and humility. Marcus raised his hand slightly, gesturing for them to calm down, but the energy in the room remained high. He wasn't trying to make a scene, but his words had clearly struck a chord. As the applause died down, Marcus turned his attention back to his book. The passengers settled in, but the atmosphere in the cabin felt lighter, more connected. People exchanged smiles and began chatting with one another, inspired by the unexpected lesson they'd just witnessed. Lydia, still standing by the galley, felt a wave of shame and regret. She realized that her quick judgment had robbed her of the opportunity to treat Marcus with the respect he deserved from the start. Determined to make things right, she decided to find a way to truly earn his forgiveness. Little did Lydia know, Marcus had already moved past the incident. For him, the situation wasn't about holding a grudge. It was about showing that kindness and dignity could transform even the most awkward moments into something meaningful. The flight was well underway, and most passengers were settled in, either enjoying the in-flight entertainment or chatting with one another. Marcus, meanwhile, sipped his coffee and continued reading, seemingly unbothered by the earlier drama. Despite his calm demeanor, the incident at the gate was still fresh in the minds of the passengers. And Lydia, standing near the galley, Lydia replayed the interaction in her mind. Her assumptions, her tone, the humiliation she caused, it all felt so unnecessary now. She couldn't stop thinking about how Marcus had handled the situation with such grace, never raising his voice or losing his composure. The contrast between his behavior and hers made her stomach twist with regret. A flight attendant approached her with a tray of drinks. "You okay?" the attendant asked, noticing Lydia's distracted expression. Lydia nodded quickly. "Yeah, I'm fine," she replied, though her voice lacked conviction. The attendant gave her a curious look but didn't press further. Instead, she walked over to Marcus, offering him a refill. As she poured his coffee, Marcus looked up and smiled warmly. "Thank you," he said, his tone sincere. The attendant smiled back. "You're welcome, Mr. Hayes. If there's anything else you need, just let us know." Lydia overheard the exchange and felt another pang of guilt. Marcus's kindness, even after everything, made her actions feel even worse. She realized she hadn't just judged him. She had disrespected someone who deserved better, not because of his status, but because of his humanity. Determined to make amends, Lydia decided to act. She grabbed a notepad and pen from the galley and sat down at a small counter, her hands trembling slightly as she began to write. The words didn't come easily at first, but she forced herself to be honest. "Dear Mr. Hayes, I want to sincerely apologize for how I treated you earlier. My behavior was unprofessional and unfair, and I deeply regret making assumptions about you based on appearances. You deserve better, and I failed to provide the respect and kindness that every passenger deserves. Your calm and gracious response taught me an important lesson, and I promise to do better in the future. Thank you for your patience and for reminding me of the importance of treating everyone with dignity. Sincerely, Lydia." After finishing the note, Lydia hesitated. Should she deliver it now? Would it even matter? Taking a deep breath, she folded the paper and slipped it into an envelope. She approached Marcus cautiously, her heart pounding. "Excuse me, Mr. Hayes," Lydia said quietly, her voice shaking slightly. Marcus looked up from his book, his expression polite but curious. "Yes? I just wanted to give you this," she said, holding out the envelope. "It's an apology for earlier." Marcus took the envelope, his calm demeanor unchanged. "Thank you," he said simply. "I appreciate that." Lydia nodded and stepped back, retreating to the galley as quickly as she could. Her heart raced as she watched him open the envelope and read the note. She couldn't tell what he was thinking, but when he looked up and gave her a small, understanding nod, relief washed over her. For the rest of the flight, Lydia stayed focused on her duties, determined to prove she could be better. Marcus, meanwhile, returned to his book, a faint smile playing on his lips. He admired her effort to make things right, knowing that sometimes the hardest step is admitting when you're wrong. The remainder of the flight passed without incident, but the atmosphere in first class had shifted. Passengers who had witnessed the earlier scene were now chatting more openly, exchanging stories, and even laughing together. Marcus, ever the calm presence, was part of the conversations but never dominated them. His quiet confidence had a way of making everyone around him feel comfortable. Lydia, for her part, had been working harder than ever. She had taken her apology to heart and had tried to make sure her actions matched her words. Every time she passed by Marcus, she gave him a small, respectful smile, and though he didn't speak much, he acknowledged her with a nod. To Lydia, those small gestures meant a lot more than she expected. During one of her breaks, Rachel approached Lydia. The senior manager had been keeping a close eye on the situation all day, wanting to make sure that the incident didn't escalate any further. "I noticed you've been handling things a lot better since, well, earlier," Rachel said, her tone neutral but kind. "I'm glad to see you've taken responsibility for your actions." Lydia swallowed and nodded. "I know I made a mistake, Rachel. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I'm honestly embarrassed. But I want to do better." Rachel smiled. "It's not easy to admit when you're wrong, especially when it's in front of so many people, but that's how we grow. Keep this up, and you'll see the difference it can make, not just for you, but for the passengers." Lydia appreciated Rachel's words. She had never been one to shy away from hard work, but this experience had taught her something more profound than anything she'd learned from a training manual. She was beginning to understand what it meant to respect others, not because of their title or appearance, but because every person deserves dignity. As the plane began its descent into their destination city, Marcus looked out the window, his mind at ease. He had long since stopped thinking about the earlier encounter, his thoughts now focused on the next steps in his career and personal life. But something about the journey had left an impression on him as well. The way Lydia had tried to make things right, and the way the passengers responded to his calm approach, reminded him that respect and kindness go a long way. Lydia came over with a final round of refreshments before landing. She stopped at Marcus's seat, offering him a warm, apologetic smile. "Thank you again, Mr. Hayes, for your patience and understanding," she said quietly. "I really appreciate it." Marcus looked up, meeting her gaze for a moment. "I appreciate your effort to make things right," he replied. "It takes courage to admit when you've made a mistake." Lydia smiled slightly, her shoulders relaxing for the first time that day. "It's been a valuable lesson, one I'll never forget." As the plane touched down, there was a sense of calm among the passengers. Some had gotten to know Marcus a little better. Others had learned something about handling difficult situations with grace, and Lydia, for the first time, felt like she had truly earned the respect of those around her. Walking off the plane, Lydia found herself reflecting on how one simple mistake had turned into an opportunity for growth. And though she didn't know if she would ever see Marcus again, she felt certain that his quiet wisdom had made a lasting impact on her. The real victory wasn't in her apology, but in her willingness to change. And that was something she would carry with her always. After the plane landed, Marcus stood up, stretching his legs after the long flight. He gathered his things with practiced efficiency, his movements calm and deliberate. As he stepped into the aisle, he noticed Lydia was busy with her duties. Her face seemed more relaxed, her steps lighter than before. He thought about what had happened, reflecting on the day's events and the lesson that had unfolded. The moment Marcus reached the gate, he turned back for one last look at the cabin. Lydia caught his eye, and for a second, she hesitated. Then she walked over to him, her face more open than it had been earlier. She stopped just in front of him, her voice quiet but sincere. "Mr. Hayes," she began, "I just want to say thank you again for your understanding. I truly appreciate your patience, and I'll make sure to apply the lesson I've learned from this experience." Marcus nodded with a small smile. "I'm glad to hear that, Lydia. It's not always easy to admit when we're wrong, but it's an important step in growing as a person." Lydia looked down, her eyes filled with sincerity. "I've learned a lot today, not just about customer service, but about respect. It's something I'll carry with me in every part of my life. Thank you for not making it harder on me." Marcus paused for a moment, considering her words. "Sometimes, the hardest lessons are the ones that change us the most," he said thoughtfully. "It's not about the mistake itself, but about how we choose to move forward afterward." Lydia smiled, her eyes brighter now. "I won't forget this lesson." With that, they exchanged a few more words, and Marcus made his way through the gate, heading for his next destination. As he walked through the airport, he reflected on the flight and how things had turned out. He hadn't expected the incident to become such a turning point, not just for Lydia, but for everyone involved. Lydia, still at the gate, watched him leave. As soon as she returned to her post, she couldn't help but think about everything that had happened. She realized how much her own assumptions had limited her understanding of others. Until now, she had been quick to judge people based on appearances or first impressions, without taking the time to really see who they were. She'd learned that lesson the hard way. As she moved through the rest of her shift, Lydia found herself applying the lesson in every interaction. She treated each passenger with kindness, listening to their needs with patience. She found that, in doing so, the entire atmosphere around her shifted. People responded more positively, and the day seemed to go by much more smoothly. It was as though the respect she gave others came back to her tenfold. Later that evening, as Lydia prepared to leave the airport, she received a message from her supervisor. The company had received feedback from the flight's passengers about the incident at the gate, and there was a surprising twist. Many passengers had praised how she handled the situation afterward. They had noticed her effort to make amends and appreciated her willingness to learn and improve. The words filled Lydia with a deep sense of satisfaction. While she knew she still had a lot of work to do, she also realized that every step forward, no matter how small, was a victory. The day's events had been a lesson in humility and personal growth, and she was determined to never forget it. Meanwhile, Marcus had arrived at his hotel, ready to rest before another busy day. As he settled into his room, he reflected on his part in the day's events. He had done nothing extraordinary, but his calm response had made all the difference. He smiled to himself, thinking that sometimes a little patience and understanding were all it took to turn a difficult situation into an opportunity for growth. The next morning, Marcus woke up early, his mind already focused on the tasks ahead. He had a busy day of meetings and work planned, but as he checked his phone, he noticed something unexpected. His inbox was flooded with messages, and the notifications kept coming. At first, he was confused, wondering why so many people were reaching out to him. As he scrolled through the messages, he saw that some were from business colleagues, while others were from friends. But there were also messages from people he didn't know, complete strangers. A few had even sent him links to news articles. Curious, he clicked on one. To his surprise, it was a story about the incident that had taken place on his flight the day before. The headline read, "Passengers' calm response to airport workers' mistreatment goes viral." The article described the situation in detail, explaining how a simple misunderstanding at the boarding gate had turned into a moment of personal growth and learning, both for Marcus and Lydia. As he continued reading, Marcus saw that the story had spread quickly on social media, with people praising his calmness and composure. Many shared the powerful message he had conveyed about treating others with respect, regardless of their appearance or background. What had started as a small issue was now a conversation that was inspiring people all over the world. The article even quoted some of the passengers who had witnessed the interaction, with one man saying, "I was impressed by how Mr. Hayes handled the situation. It's not every day you see someone show that kind of grace under pressure." Marcus smiled to himself, a little surprised by the attention. He had never expected such a simple moment to have such an impact. But as he read through the comments, he realized that what had touched people wasn't just the way he had responded, but the lesson it carried. The importance of patience, kindness, and taking the time to understand others. The more he thought about it, the more he appreciated the unexpected twist the situation had taken. It wasn't just about getting an apology from Lydia or moving on from the awkwardness of the moment. It was about how people had learned something valuable from what had happened, and how, in a world that often felt divided, small acts of kindness could have a big effect. As the day went on, Marcus began to receive more messages, including one from Lydia herself. Her message was simple but heartfelt. "I just wanted to thank you again. The story has gone viral, and people are praising how you handled everything. I'm grateful for the lesson I learned, and I promise I'll do better from now on." Marcus smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. He had never expected any kind of recognition for what had happened. He had simply acted the way he thought was right. But it seemed that sometimes doing the right thing could inspire others to do the same. Later that afternoon, Marcus got a call from Rachel, the senior gate manager. "Marcus," she said, "I just wanted to let you know that the airline has decided to take your story as an example of exceptional customer service. They're planning to feature it in our training programs for new employees. They believe it shows how important it is to treat every passenger with respect, no matter what." Marcus was taken aback. "I had no idea it had gotten this far," he said with a laugh. Rachel chuckled. "Neither did we, but it's a good reminder for all of us about the power of respect and how it can change lives." As Marcus hung up the phone, he realized something. What had started as a small incident at the airport had now become a story that would help people everywhere. And that was more than he could have ever imagined.